Hi, hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Hey Guys. So, we've been talking about sketching. We've covered line, we've covered rectangle, we've covered circles and arcs. Let's talk about one other thing that relates to all of those, and that is something called constraints. So, I've started a new sketch, hit the N key for normal to view, and over here on the far right hand corner, there's a drop down list with a lot of constraints. So what is a constraint? Well, a constraint is a way to define our geometry that is not a dimension. A dimension is a constraint, but we separate that out from the rest of the constraints. And let me show you how that works. All right, so first I'm going to make a couple of lines here, and we're going to run through some of these constraints. All right, so the very first one is the coincidence constraint. Coincidence just means that we're joining two things together. So we could join the endpoints of these lines, and now those are locked together. I can still move those lines around, but no matter what I do, those 2 points are always connected. All right, so that's coincidence. Oh, lost my line. Go back. All right. In addition to doing the endpoints, I can also make the endpoint of a line also coincident with a line or an arc or a circle, and all that means is that the endpoint of that line is attached to that other line, circle or arc, doesn't matter, whatever. So that's what coincidence is. It just attaches the point, a point to another sketch entity, line, circle, arc, rectangle, whatever. All right, so concentric would be if we had, say, a couple of circles. Let's go ahead and draw a couple of circles. And if we grab the concentric constraint, all that's going to do is basically line up their center points. I don't really use concentric a lot. I usually use coincidence more, but that's what concentric is it will put those center points right on top of each other. Parallel sounds pretty straightforward. We're going to take two lines, and if we hit the parallel line, parallel constraint, we now have these two lines that no matter where we move them, they always remain parallel. All right, pretty straightforward stuff there. Let's go ahead and undo that constraint. And tangent. All right, so tangent. Let's say I have, let me just bring this over, and we'll go ahead and create a coincidence. See how there's a coincident constraint little symbol down there? That tells me that I got that point right on there. And if I grab the tangent, so right now that line is attached to that circle, but it's not tangent to that circle. So if I click on either one of these two, doesn't matter which one I click on first, but the line and the circle, it's going to make those two tangent to each other. Now, because I didn't have a dimension on that circle, it made the circle a lot smaller, so it didn't have to move the line. Onshape is going to try to figure out the best way to make these things happen. If something goes wrong and you're like, oh, no, I didn't want that to happen, you could come back in and you could dimension the circle and lock that size of that circle in. Then when you come back and you hit that tangent button, then it's just going to move the circle, but the circle is going to stay the same size. And that line is now tangent. All right, so let's move along, and we will find our next constraint, is the horizontal constraint. Horizontal and vertical constraint, pretty straightforward. If I have a horizontal constraint queued up and I click on a line, that makes that line horizontal. Also, if I have a vertical constraint, that's going to make that line, the line vertical. That's simple. Now we can also create new lines, and we can make those lines, well, let's go like this. We'll have that line, we'll have that line, and then if we say, I want this point and that point vertical to each other, now those 2 points are vertical to each other, right? And they will always be vertical to each other as long as that constraint exists. So if I'm trying to get 2 things aligned in some part, and I know that they're directly on top of each other, I might use the vertical constraint or the horizontal constraint, depending on which way I need to align them to make that happen. So if I take what I've got there, and I take, say, this point and put a horizontal constraint, now they are both all horizontal to each other. That point and that point are horizontal to each other. Great constraint. I love vertical and horizontal and what they provide for getting my designs locked in. Perpendicular constraint, if I have 2 lines and I want them to be perpendicular to each other, they don't have to be joined, but now this line will always be 90 degrees relative to this line. So if I move this line around, there's always going to be perpendicular to each other. All right. And what's next? Equal. So if I have, let's go ahead and do something with the circle. So if I make a circle over here, and I grab the equals constraint, and I click this circle first, and then that circle, that makes those 2 the same size. All right, so equal, if I make this line equal to this line, then they're both the same size as well. Really great when you have like a repeated feature on one of your designs using the equals constraint. That way you can dimension 1 and then apply equals, and you don't have to dimension any more. All right, midpoint will create a connection between a point and the midpoint of a line. Now it also makes it coincident, so it definitely attaches it, but it attaches it at the midpoint. So you can see that this is never going to move. This is always going to be locked right in at the midpoint. So that's midpoint. Couple more to go here. Normal is when we have a line and we want that line kind of, basically I like to think of it this way. Even though we're talking about a line and a curve, it makes it as if it's perpendicular to the line. So in other words, the line cuts right through in line between a point, between its center point and the point where the line is. So see how the line is always going to be basically in line with the center point, and it can join with the circle, but it's always going to have that line going straight towards the center of that circle. That's what normal is. And let's see what else we have here. Piers, we're going to deal with piers and symmetric, fixed, and curvature in a later video. So hopefully that helps you out with getting your, this is a great way to save a lot of time so that you're not dimensioning everything. Allows you to get stuff lined up, joined together. If you've created a form and you're wondering why it won't extrude, chances are if you've made it with using a bunch of lines and arcs, perhaps one of those 2 didn't quite meet. You can zoom in real close and use coincidence to lock those in together. All right. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Don't forget, like and subscribe.